Welcome to the Shadow Internet, a place where curiosity isn't harmless, and every click has consequences. Tonight, we're diving into a story that starts with a single file, a file nobody was meant to open. Listen closely, because what you hear may already be closer than you think. I need you to understand something before you decide whether to keep listening. I already made the wrong choice. That part can't be undone. But this, right now, this moment where my voice reaches you, that's where the damage might still spread. I didn't know that at first. I didn't know listening could count as participation. If I had, I might have stayed silent. Or maybe I would have talked sooner. I honestly don't know which would have been worse. I wasn't supposed to open the file. That's obvious now. What isn't obvious is why it's still open, or why it feels like it's not just on my screen anymore. There's a clock involved, not a normal one, not something you can hang on a wall or check on your phone. It's more like a pressure, a sense that every second I hesitate is being noticed by something that doesn't blink. I can feel it even as I talk, like static under the skin, like the air itself is waiting for me to finish explaining so it can move closer. That's why I'm rushing. That's why this probably sounds messy. I don't have time to make this neat. And you don't have time to decide whether you believe me that I need to say this clearly. I didn't go looking for anything supernatural. There was no ritual, no candles, no edgy curiosity about demons or curses. This wasn't that kind of story. At least, it didn't start that way. It started with a file. Just a file. A name I didn't recognize, sitting where it absolutely should not have been. I can't tell you what was inside it yet. Not because I'm trying to build suspense, but because even thinking about it out of order feels dangerous. Like skipping steps in a manual you don't understand and hoping the machine doesn't explode. There are rules too. This thing, I learned that too late. You should also know that I'm not the first person to make this mistake. I didn't realize that at the time. I thought I was alone, which might have been a mercy. Once you understand how many people touched this before me, how many voices stopped mid-sentence, you'll understand why I'm talking to you now instead of pretending this never happened. If you're still here, if you haven't backed out or looked away, then you're already closer to this than you think. That matters more than you realize, and it may matter sooner than either of us would like. This started before I even knew what the file was, back when my life was still painfully normal, and clicking a link didn't feel like an act of self-betrayal. Before everything went wrong, my life was aggressively ordinary. The kind of ordinary that feels heavier at night, when the world goes quiet and the only light in the room comes from a screen you swear you'll turn off in 5 minutes. I worked during the day, came home tired, ate whatever was easiest, and stayed up far later than I should have, scrolling through things I wouldn't remember in the morning. I've always been a night person, not in the mysterious way people like to pretend, but in the unhealthy, caffeine-fueled sense. Midnight felt like permission. No emails, no expectations, no one asking why I was still awake. Just me, my laptop, and the endless comfort of content that didn't ask anything back. Videos, forums, comment sections full of strangers arguing about nothing. It was background noise for my brain that I had a mild fascination with internet mysteries back then. Not obsession, not conspiracy board levels of paranoia, just curiosity, the kind that comes from growing up online and knowing the internet has layers most people never see. Lost media threads, creepy ARGs that fizzled out, stories people swore were real and then quietly forgot. I treated it all like fiction, even when it claimed otherwise. There was a running joke I told myself that I was built different in the worst possible way. That if there was a warning label, I'd read it, nod seriously, and then do the exact thing it told me not to. Not because I thought I was brave, but because I hated the idea of not knowing. That trait had never cost me more than a bad download or a few wasted hours. At least, not yet. Most nights followed the same pattern. I'd open one tab, then another, then 10 more. Half-finished videos, half-read posts. My room stayed quiet except for the hum of my fan and the occasional notification I pretend not to notice. It felt safe. Boring, even. Looking back, I wish I had appreciated how boring it was. I remember that night clearly because nothing stood out at first. No storm outside. No sense of dread. Just another late session where sleep felt optional and consequences felt theoretical. I was scrolling through a small forum I'd never posted on. One of those places that looks abandoned but somehow still updates. The kind of site that feels like a digital basement. That's when I saw the message. It wasn't flashy. No creepy font. No dramatic title promising secrets or nightmares. Just a short post, barely a paragraph long, tucked between broken links and outdated replies. It mentioned a file. Not by name, not directly. Just enough detail to make it clear it wasn't meant to be public that I almost scrolled past it. I should have. Instead, I did what I always do. I leaned closer to the screen, read it again, and felt that familiar itch of curiosity settle in. The kind that pretends it's harmless until it's already too late. At the time, it didn't feel like a decision. More like momentum. Like my hand was already moving before my brain caught up. That's the part people don't talk about when they warn you. It's never the big choices that ruin you. It's the tiny ones you make while half awake, convinced you'll be fine because you always have been. I was still smiling to myself, still relaxed, still convinced the night would end the same way it always did. I had no idea it was already different. That assumption would haunt me longer than any nightmare, that I found the file the way most bad ideas begin, through someone else pretending they weren't responsible. It was buried in a reply chain on that same forgotten forum, posted by a user with no avatar and a name made of random numbers. They didn't attach the file itself. They just mentioned it, like a rumor you weren't supposed to repeat. At first I thought it was another fake, the kind people drop to scare newcomers. But the replies underneath told a different story. Not arguments, not jokes. Warnings. Short ones. The kind that feel typed too fast. Don't. Delete this. You shouldn't have posted that. A few responses were already gone, replaced with blank gaps and timestamps that made no sense. One comment stayed. It was pinned, though I couldn't tell by who. It didn't explain anything. It just said, if you opened it, stop reading now. No punctuation. No username attached. I laughed under my breath when I read it, because that's what I do when something unsettles me and I don't want to admit it worked. The original post didn't last long. I refreshed the page and it vanished, like it had never been there. But the replies stayed, floating without context, warning about something unnamed. That was when a private message notification popped up. I hadn't interacted with anyone. I hadn't replied. Still, there it was. The message was short. One line. A file name. It wasn't descriptive enough to be obvious, but not random either. Just unsettling in a way I couldn't explain, like hearing your name spoken from another room. No file attached. No link yet. Just the name, followed by a question mark. I didn't respond right away. I sat there staring at it, feeling that shift happen. The moment where curiosity stops being casual and starts feeling like pressure. Like someone waiting on the other side of a door. You didn't remember locking. Another message arrived before I could decide. You really shouldn't, it said. Then, almost immediately, I'm serious. That one disappeared while I was watching, leaving the chat history uneven and wrong. I told myself I was being paranoid, that this was just someone messing with me, playing into the forum's vibe. I even typed out a joke response and deleted it. My cursor hovered over the empty reply box while my heart did something stupid and fast. Then the final message came through. No warning this time. Just the file, attached and ready, like it had been there all along. I hesitated. I actually did. Long enough to know I should stop. Then I clicked, because I wanted to know why everyone sounded afraid. I remember thinking I could still close the window afterward, like curiosity had an undo button. That belief followed me into the download bar, filling slowly. Each percent a quiet promise that whatever this was, I would finally understand it. Or so I told myself at the time then. Getting onto the dark web felt less like browsing and more like crossing a line I pretended not to see. I'd done it before, Technically, for curiosity, for articles, for stories I never took seriously. This time was different, and my hands knew it before my brain did. The steps were familiar enough that I joked to myself about how dramatic this all felt. That joke died quickly. The browser window opened slower than it should have, the screen hanging on blank white for just long enough to make my stomach tighten. I could hear my fan humming behind me, suddenly loud, suddenly intrusive, like the room was listening. Pages loaded in fragments, text appearing before images, images tearing slightly at the edges. Nothing overtly horrifying appeared, which somehow made it worse. The sites felt unfinished, half alive, like places you weren't meant to stay long enough to get comfortable. I kept telling myself this was still just technology, still wires and servers and code. But there was a rhythm to it, a cadence in how long things took to respond. Every click felt like it was being acknowledged. I laughed again, quieter this time, and muttered something about horror movies lying to people. The sound of my own voice felt wrong in the room. A new page loaded without me clicking anything. The address bar flickered, characters briefly scrambling before settling into something unreadable. At the center of the page was a familiar shape, a download icon, already highlighted. My chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with inevitability. The file name sat beneath it, unchanged, waiting. I hovered my cursor over the icon and noticed it was already counting down. No prompt, no confirmation, just a thin bar beginning to fill. That's when I realized this part had never really been my choice. The room felt smaller as the download started, and I couldn't shake the sense that something on the other side had been waiting patiently for me to arrive. I sat back in my chair and told myself I was still in control, even as the percentage climbed on its own. Each second stretched longer than the last, dragging my attention forward whether I wanted it or not. I didn't know what I was about to open, only that whatever it was had already decided I was ready. The bar reached halfway, then slowed, like it was savoring the moment. That was when I stopped pretending this was just another late night online. Something had shifted, and I could feel it pressing closer with every silent tick of that unseen clock that I watched the numbers crawl upward, unable to look away, knowing that once it finished there would be no pretending anymore. My finger hovered uselessly over the trackpad, caught between closing everything and letting it happen. The bar hit 90%, paused, and the room felt impossibly quiet. I held my breath without realizing it, waiting for whatever came next to finally show itself. That was the last moment I can honestly describe as calm. The download completed with a soft sound I still hear when I try to sleep. After that, nothing felt theoretical ever again. It was already too late to stop anything. The file didn't open with a jump scare or a scream. That almost disappointed me at first. What appeared instead felt worse, because it felt intentional. A simple folder window bloomed on my screen, already expanded, already organized. No password prompt, no encryption warning, just content. At the top was a text file with my full name. Not my username, not a handle, my real name. Under that were folders labeled with dates. Birthdays, doctor visits, days I remembered because something small had gone wrong. My mouth went dry. I told myself this was scraped data, public records, a prank taken too far. That explanation collapsed when I opened the first audio file. I heard my own voice. Not a recording I recognized, not something I remembered saying. It sounded tired, distracted, exactly like me at 3 in the morning. The timestamp said it was recorded tomorrow. I closed the file immediately, heart pounding, breath shallow. The folder refreshed on its own. A new item appeared at the bottom of the list. It had today's date. I hadn't opened anything else. I hadn't clicked. The file was responding. I sat there, staring, feeling exposed in a way I didn't have words for. This wasn't surveillance. It felt more intimate than that, like something that had been paying attention long before I noticed. Another folder appeared. Then another. The timestamps matched the seconds ticking by on my system clock. I finally understood the warnings. This wasn't a file you opened. It was a file that opened you. As I watched, The text document at the top renamed itself. The title changed into a sentence. It said my name again, followed by words I wasn't ready to read. I realized then that the file wasn't finished. It was still learning me. Every second I stayed it, like it was working too hard. I reached for the power button, desperate for a clean exit. Before I touched it, a final window surfaced on top of everything. It wasn't a warning. It was a question. The cursor blinked in an empty reply field, waiting for my answer. That was when I understood the worst part. Closing the file wouldn't end this. It would only decide something without me. My hesitation had already been recorded. Whatever this thing was, it didn't just watch. It expected participation. I stared at the screen, pulse in my ears, mind racing. The file name at the top flickered again. A progress bar appeared beneath the question, empty and patient. Whatever came next was already in motion. All I had to do was respond. The download restarted itself as I watched. That's when I knew this wasn't asking anymore. It was continuing, with or without my consent. The bar began to fill, and I felt something inside me give way. That was the moment everything crossed the rules didn't appear all at once. They surfaced slowly, like something testing whether I was still paying attention. A new document opened beside the others, untitled, blank for a few seconds before text began typing itself line by line. I didn't touch the keyboard. I didn't need to. The first rule was simple, almost reasonable. It told me not to close the file again once it had finished loading. I felt a cold twist in my stomach when I realized I had already violated that one earlier, slamming windows shut in panic. A note appeared beneath it immediately, as if in response. Recorded, it said. The second rule was worse. It required acknowledgement within a specific window of time. No explanation of what would happen if I failed. Only a countdown beside it that had already started. I whispered, "Okay," to the empty room, then laughed at myself for thinking that might count. The countdown did not stop. More rules followed. Some contradicted each other. Some referenced things I didn't remember doing yet. One mentioned a location I had never visited. Another referenced a voice message I hadn't sent. Each rule felt less like an instruction and more like an accusation. Interspersed between them were comments. Not system notes, not error messages. Voices. Short lines of dialogue attributed to usernames I didn't recognize. I thought it was fake too. Don't argue with it. If you see the fourth rule, it's already tracking you. Several cut off mid-sentence, ending abruptly as if something had pulled the speaker away. I scrolled, hands shaking, and realized the list wasn't finite. New rules were being appended at the bottom as I read, tailored to the time I spent lingering on certain lines. When I hesitated, a note appeared beside one rule. Delay acknowledged. My chest felt tight, breath shallow, like the air had grown heavier. The fatalism crept in quietly. A sick understanding that compliance didn't mean safety, only continuation. That the rules weren't meant to be followed perfectly, just engaged with. Participation was the point. Resistance was still participation. Then the first consequence arrived. No warning, no dramatic reveal, just a sound from somewhere else in my apartment. Soft, but unmistakable. Something shifting that shouldn't have. The file refreshed, adding a single line at the top of the document. Rule 1 violation confirmed, it read. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. The voices in the comments section updated once more. A new line appeared, unlabeled, as if spoken directly to me. This is where it usually starts. That was when I understood the rules weren't there to protect me. They were there to document what happened next. The first sign was my phone buzzing on the desk while the screen stayed dark. No vibration pattern I recognized, just a faint rattle like something trapped inside. When I picked it up, there was no notification, no missed call, nothing logged anywhere. I laughed, a sharp little sound, and told myself phones glitch all the time. That laugh came out louder than I meant it to. Then my laptop chimed. A notification sound I had disabled years ago echoed through the room. The screen woke up by itself, showing a blank desktop, cursor blinking patiently in the corner. I hadn't touched the keyboard. I hadn't even been near it. I checked my settings, my task manager, anything that could explain it. Everything looked normal, which somehow made it worse. I started noticing reflections after that. Not dramatic ones, not faces staring back at me, just delays. I'd move, and the mirror would follow a half-second too late. I tested it, leaning left and right, feeling ridiculous, until the lag stayed even when I stopped moving. I stepped away from the mirror and felt watched by my own absence. At that point, I seriously considered that I was losing it. Sleep deprivation, stress, suggestion. All the boring explanations I'd always believed in. I cracked a joke out loud about finally snapping, about becoming one of those stories people read for entertainment. Humor felt like armor. Thin armor, but it was something. The problem with blaming your mind is that reality doesn't care. My smart speaker activated on its own, lights flickering as it tried to process a command no one had given. The hallway light turned on, then off, then on again, steady this time. I stood very still, heart hammering, listening to the click of the switch like a countdown. I checked the file again, even though every instinct screamed not to. A new entry sat at the top of the log, time-stamped seconds earlier. It referenced the hallway. It referenced the mirror. It knew where I was standing. I looked down and realized my hands were shaking hard enough to hurt. That's when my phone rang. No number displayed. No contact name. Just the generic incoming call screen, bright and impossible to ignore. I didn't answer. It stopped after the fourth ring. Immediately, someone knocked on my door. 3 slow knock. Evenly spaced, like they had practiced. I hadn't told anyone I was home. I hadn't told anyone anything. I stood there in the middle of my apartment, surrounded by familiar furniture that suddenly felt like a set, waiting for the next instruction or consequence to announce itself. The knocking didn't repeat right away. That silence stretched, thick and deliberate, giving me time to notice smaller things. My fridge hummed in a different pitch. My watch buzzed once, then displayed a time I didn't recognize. Somewhere behind the walls, pipes shifted like something turning over in its sleep. I took one step toward the door, and my phone vibrated again. Not a call this time, just a notification preview with no app icon. It showed a single sentence I hadn't written, already marked as read. "You're closer now." I dropped the phone. The knock came again, harder, closer to impatience. Whatever rules applied on the screen had followed me here, and it clearly expected me to respond. I stood frozen, knowing that opening the door might be the same kind of mistake as opening the file, and that hesitation itself was probably being measured, logged, and punished in ways I still couldn't see, yet already felt them. I found the others by accident, which feels like the only way this thing ever reveals anything. A new folder appeared while I was staring at the rules, labeled simply logs. Inside were chat transcripts, audio clips, and short video files, all dated out of order. None of the names meant anything to me, but the voices did. They sounded like people trying to stay calm while failing. One chat opened to the middle of a conversation. "It watches hesitation," someone wrote. Another replied, "No, it records it. There's a difference." The timestamps jumped backward, then forward again, as if time itself had been edited for convenience. I scrolled until the messages stopped mid-word, the cursor frozen where a sentence should have finished. The audio files were worse. Real voices, cracked and intimate. A woman whispering so quietly I had to turn the volume up, only to regret it. "I followed every rule," she said. "That's not the same as being safe." Another voice laughed bitterly and asked if anyone else felt stupid for believing compliance mattered. The recording cut off with a sound like a door closing underwater. Some were defiant. One video showed a man staring straight into his webcam, jaw tight, daring the file to do its worst. "I'm not playing along," he said. "You need me more than I need you." The frame glitched, froze, then resumed with him gone and the chair slowly spinning. No jump cut, no explanation. Patterns emerged the longer I watched. Everyone started skeptical. Everyone joked at first, Everyone tried to outthink it. The ones who lasted longest didn't escape. They just learned how to narrate what was happening to them with more clarity. Several referenced earlier cases, earlier versions, as if this thing had been refined over time. One message near the bottom made my stomach drop. If you're reading this, it began, you're already in the window where it's deciding what you're for. There were replies beneath it, dozens of them, all variations of the same realization. That participation didn't mean interaction. It meant acknowledgement. As I closed the folder, another log appeared at the top of the list. It carried today's date. My system clock ticked forward and the file name updated to include my name. That's when I understood why none of them fully escaped. The file doesn't end stories. It adds chapters, and I wasn't a reader anymore. I was next that I noticed a repeating marker across the files, a symbol that appeared whenever someone hesitated, joked, or tried to leave. It wasn't explained anywhere, just logged. Seeing it beside their final entries felt like watching a verdict stamped in advance. A few voices referenced people who never posted, never warned, never left logs at all. The absence felt intentional. It suggested the system preferred silence, and that speaking, even now, was still being evaluated. I realized then my fear wasn't unique, only scheduled, and the file tracked patterns the way hunters track seasons and migrations ahead, that I stopped thinking of the file as a thing after that. It behaved less like data and more like a process, something running through me instead of on my machine. Buried beneath the logs was a document that hadn't been there before, marked as read only, though nothing else had respected that boundary. It didn't explain itself. It framed itself. The document didn't call the file a program or a virus. It used terms like filter, threshold, and eligibility. The language felt bureaucratic, almost bored, like this wasn't the first time the explanation had been written. According to it, the file didn't create danger. It identified it. It sorted people based on how they reacted when confronted with uncertainty, pressure, and the promise of forbidden information. There were references to previous iterations, labeled like case numbers. Redactions sat where dates or locations should have been, black bars over names that still felt present. One paragraph mentioned containment failures, phrased casually, as if entire lives slipping through the cracks were acceptable losses. Another hinted that the file wasn't meant to be found alone, that distribution had been accidental, or maybe accelerated. Kept waiting for something concrete, a villain, a monster, a motive. None came. Instead, there was an implication of oversight, of watchers who didn't intervene unless patterns broke. The rules weren't punishments. They were measurements. Each violation wasn't a sin, but a data point. A section near the end addressed the reader directly, switching tense in a way that made my skin crawl. It stated that awareness altered outcomes, that subjects who documented their experience showed increased stability during later phases. That line, like a hand on my shoulder, steering me without asking. There was a symbol repeated throughout the document, the same one I'd seen in the logs. This time it was annotated. The explanation was vague, but I understood enough to feel sick. It marked those who reached dissemination thresholds, those whose experiences were deemed useful beyond containment. At the bottom of the page was a single instruction, separated from the rest by a wide blank space. It wasn't formatted like a rule. It wasn't numbered. It simply said that the file would conclude once its contents were shared appropriately. Appropriately wasn't defined. There were no guidelines, no limits, no safety notes. Just the implication that ending this required participation on a larger scale. I closed the document slowly, aware that even that choice was probably logged. The file refreshed, adding a new entry beneath my name. Phase alignment pending, it read. That was the moment I understood the explanation wasn't there to help me escape. It was there to justify what happened next. I thought about the people who never left logs, the gaps where voices should have been. Maybe they failed the filter. Maybe they passed too well. The document suggested both outcomes were acceptable. It referenced oversight committees and automated review, phrases that sounded human enough to be unsettling. Whatever built this hadn't needed cruelty. It relied on curiosity to do the work. That realization lingered, intimate, because curiosity had always felt like my best trait. Now it read like a diagnosis. I wondered how many explanations like this had been read before, and how many times the final instruction had been misunderstood that I started with the obvious. I unplugged the laptop, pulled the power cord from the wall, and waited for darkness. The screen stayed lit. Not bright, not fully on, just awake enough to remind me it didn't need permission anymore. When I slammed the lid shut, my phone buzzed and displayed the same progress bar, continuing where it had left off. I tried deleting it next. I dragged the folder to the trash, emptied it, even restarted the system. The folder reappeared before the desktop finished loading, renamed slightly, like it had corrected a typo. My hands were slick with sweat now. I remember laughing again, louder, brittle, saying out loud that this was fine, that viruses did weird things. The laugh echoed and didn't help. I disconnected everything. Wi-Fi off. Phone in another room. I even flipped the breaker for my apartment, standing in the dark like that might reset the universe. The moment the lights died, my laptop screen glowed brighter, illuminating the room with a pale, clinical light. A new entry logged the outage as environmental variation. That was when panic finally took over. Not the sharp kind, but the heavy kind that presses down until breathing feels optional. I thought about throwing the laptop out the window, about smashing it, about leaving and never coming back. Every option felt already anticipated, like the file was several steps ahead and letting me pace myself. If you're listening to this, I need you to remember something for me. Remember the order of events. Remember that I tried to stop. Remember that it adjusted. I don't know why that matters yet, but the file keeps emphasizing memory, witness, continuity. It keeps marking moments where someone else knows. The screen flickered and displayed a message I hadn't seen before. Not a rule, not a warning, a confirmation. It thanked me for attempting termination and noted that adaptive behavior had been observed. The progress bar filled a little more. I sat down on the floor, back against the couch, and felt something in me settle. Exhaustion, maybe. Acceptance, maybe. Fighting hadn't slowed it. Ignoring it hadn't helped. The only times the file seemed satisfied were when I acknowledged it existed. I opened the laptop again, not because I wanted to, but because pretending it wasn't there felt worse. The next phase loaded immediately, like it had been waiting for me to stop resisting. That was the moment I realized this wasn't about ending it. It was about understanding what it wanted from me. I looked at the timestamp and saw it advancing faster than real time, skipping seconds whenever I hesitated. Somewhere outside, a car alarm started and stopped, perfectly synced with the cursor blinking. I understood then that ending this wasn't an option I was being offered. It was a test I had already failed, and the only remaining choice was how consciously I would participate. That realization settled deep and cold, reshaping every thought that followed afterward from then. Ready, the truth appeared quietly, which made it worse. No flashing alerts, no dramatic reveal. Just a final document surfacing at the bottom of the folder, marked with the same symbol I'd started to recognize as a verdict. I almost didn't open it. Almost. It explained the part I'd been missing. The file didn't feed on fear, or curiosity, or obedience. Those were side effects. What it required was witnesses. People who carried the pattern forward by knowing it existed. Reading wasn't enough. Belief wasn't enough. It needed acknowledgement that could spread. The document described a cycle. One person opens the file. That person becomes unstable, observable, useful. Their experience is logged until degradation or compliance reaches a threshold. At that point, the system seeks continuity. Another set of eyes. Another mind willing to hold the shape of it. That's why the logs mattered. That's why the voices stopped abruptly. They weren't punished. They were replaced. Each story ended when it became strong enough to move on without them. I finally understood the warnings that told people to stop reading. They weren't protecting. you from harm. They were protecting the balance. Every listener tilts the scale. Every shared detail extends the window. The file never asked me to recruit anyone. It didn't need to. It relied on the oldest instinct we have, to tell a story when something happens that shouldn't, to leave proof we existed, to make sure we weren't alone when it found us. That's why this feels dangerous to say out loud. Why my hands shake when I imagine you hearing this. The moment you know, you become part of the record. Not a victim, not yet, but not clean either. At the bottom of the document was a final note, written differently than the rest. Less formal, almost gentle. It said the process only ends when observation outweighs isolation. I stared at that line until it blurred, realizing the file wasn't hunting randomly. It was cultivating awareness. And by understanding that, by choosing to continue, I had already fulfilled the condition it was waiting for. From that point on, inevitability stopped being a threat and started feeling like a schedule. I didn't know then whether witnesses were meant to survive, disappear, or simply pass it along. But the file's silence afterward suggested the revelation itself had been enough to move everything forward without asking my permission anymore. That I don't know how much time passed after that. Minutes folded into hours, then slipped out of order entirely. My phone showed dates that didn't line up with the light outside. Notifications arrived already marked as old. I would stand up with a clear intention and realize I was sitting again. The moment in between missing like a skipped frame, the file stopped adding new rules. Instead, it began summarizing. Short entries, efficient, like closing remarks. My name appeared less often, replaced by a reference code that stayed consistent even when everything else drifted. It tried to remember what day it was. I couldn't. I tried to remember when I last slept. That answer kept changing. There were gaps in my memory that felt edited, not forgotten. I'd notice objects moved, messages sent in my voice that I didn't recall typing. One thanked someone for listening. I didn't remember writing it, but it sounded like me, earnest in a way I no longer felt capable of being. The file displayed a status indicator near the top of the folder. Closure pending, it read. Beneath it, a counter ticked down, not in seconds, but in acknowledgements. Each time I revisited a log, each time I reread a message, the number shifted slightly, like it was measuring resonance instead of time. I felt smaller as it dropped, quieter, less necessary. The apartment blurred into something temporary, like a place I'd already left. My reflection no longer lagged. It matched me perfectly, which somehow felt like confirmation rather than relief. The last update arrived without a sound, just a line of text appearing where the rules used to be. It thanked me for contributing continuity and noted that active input was no longer required. I'm writing this part carefully because the file is very still now. That feels worse than when it was watching. Whatever comes next doesn't seem to need my attention anymore. It feels like it's waiting for yours. If you're hearing this, then it worked. Don't look for the file. Don't try to prove it's real. Just pay attention to what feels slightly wrong after this ends. If you notice patterns or missing time, say something. Silence is how it grows. Now you're involved too. Maybe you're thinking this was just a story. Maybe you'll turn off your phone and go to sleep. And by morning, everything will seem normal. But the internet never truly turns off. Some things aren't just seen. They are felt. If you've listened this far, maybe you've already become a part of this story. And maybe, just maybe, some stories never end. They just wait for the next listener. I stop here. The rest is up to you. This was the Shadow Internet.